I know.
Good.
It's bouncy.
My feet don't touch the floor. Okay.
We all made it? We're all okay?
They might have heard about the hemorrhoids that made this a really soft couch. I don't know.
This is not IKEA.
I think it's slightly, higher quality. So first of all, I just...
Love it.
I want to thank you all for coming here, for sharing your stories, and that's actually where I want to start this conversation. Why do you think each of you has gravitated towards storytelling as a way to cope with cancer? I will start with you.
I'm insecure.
That might be the answer.
That's the whole answer?
Good night. I mean, I was a musical theater minor, and I did improv, and I liked being on the stage, and the music stuff was great, and the girls didn't want to hear Chopin in 6th grade. So, I like attention.
Yeah.
But
That's a good reason.
I didn't want this attention. In a way, can't we get on that clinical trial one day? But the whole point is, I like to be able to help people, and again, you wouldn't change it for the world if whatever. But this idea that if you have the ability to do something that you believe is valuable, and storytelling is a way to get that out there, especially when they're inane, like robot says for brain cancer, you can't make that up. These are funny things that aren't really supposed to be funny, but they're worth telling if you want to express and help people in a way that, because I like to hear stories too. So I'm not answering your question. I'm just insecure.
No. That is an answer.
Okay.
Tamika.
So for me, it's twofold. My background is in television producer, so I'm naturally a storyteller. I didn't think that I would become the story per se. The other reason is because there are people who, unfortunately, don't survive cancer. And so someone has to tell the story of what it's really like to have cancer. I lost the top third of my vagina. That's not fun for dating. So when people think that cervical cancer isn't a real cancer, oh, that's an easy cancer, you just go get a hysterectomy, you're fine.
Yeah.
It's up to me and my survivor sisters to make it real, to tell what brachytherapy is like, getting your vagina radiated from the inside out.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to shock and awe, but that's what cancer stories are all about for me. When we talk about the HPV vaccine and why it's so important to have a vaccine that prevents cancer, stories are powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Jason?
I think a couple things also. First of all, my unique story was that, people in the press wanted to speak to me, and that was not interesting to me. I didn't want to tell my story that way. So when I first spoke about it in a way that I had an ability to control the message, I got such incredible response from people in all different categories of suffering, loss, and going through grief that it inspires me to move forward. And the other thing is that, as I've learned, there's not a lot of dudes who talk about going through this kind of stuff, and so it's been meaningful for me.
Josie?
It's fun. I came to cancer as a stand-up comic. Which is sort of funny. And I teach stand-up comedy, and one of the mottos that I have is you can have a crappy day or a funny day. It's the same day. And it's up to you how you want to twist it. And, I had a one-woman show set up in September of this past year, and we set it up in January. And in February, I got diagnosed with breast cancer. So the show kind of wrote itself, and I just thought, let's take a chance and let's weave together humor and going through cancer treatment. And knowing that I could tell my story made it easier to go through treatment that got increasingly harder. Yeah. Radiation, I thought, radiation's going to be a piece of cake. Kicked my ass.
Because that's what the movies tell you.
Right. Oh,
a little vomit,
Yeah. Oh, you might get a little tired. Or, they said you're going to have a slight skin reaction. Really? 3 times the size, black and blistered, is a skin reaction? So being able to write about it as I was going through it made it easier for me to go through it. And then the more you talk to other people, you realize cancer patients don't get a chance to talk.
Yeah.
Because people don't know how to talk to cancer patients when they're saying things like, I really don't feel well. When they're saying scary things like, I don't think I can make it through the day.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can do the next round of chemo. So being able to talk about it and share that in a way that's not judgmental and lets all of us share our stories, that's where the power comes. So we then give everyone who's not going through cancer the tools to listen better to cancer patients, because you're all going to know one if you don't already. That's just what the numbers are. And I think we can all, and I'm certainly guilty of it, I could do better helping my friends with cancer. Yeah. So that's what it means to me.
I want to let the audience know that since you've heard these stories and you've had a chance to take some time and digest them, we definitely want to give you a chance to ask questions. So I'm telling you really early so you can start thinking, and there are mic runners all around. Tamika and Josie, I'm going to come back to you because, you guys talk about some pretty personal things. You talk about having the worst diarrhea of your life. You talk about your vagina, which is something that people aren't comfortable talking about on a normal day, let alone talking about it in the capacity of illness. When you were first going into public to talk about this, what was your level of nervousness, fear, angst? What were you concerned about?
Well, my mother was still alive at the time, and I grew up in South Carolina, religious, very Southern home. And, I remember the first time I told my story, it was on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Because, go big or go home.
Yes.
And I remember I got off the stage, and my friend was like, "You're going to scare everybody." So, over the years, I've learned, how to share it. Because, again, I was used to telling other people's stories, not my own story. But there's definitely this vulnerability that comes with it, especially when I was dating and knowing that, someone could go search and see that, she talks about a sexually transmitted virus like all the time. She's talking about her vagina. Wait a minute, she's lost part of her vagina. Like, what does that mean? And I've had people who can't deal with that. With Matt, we did something for a news outlet where we talked about sex in a very intimate way. My husband, bless him, he just lets me do my own thing, and my stepdaughter, who's 16, when we did this article, he came home with it before I had read it in its entirety. And he said, you really went there. And so I was like, I'm glad I can help everybody else, but let me dial back a little bit for the next 2 months or so to give him some breathing room. And, now he's going to be like, "Hi, honey. What are you doing?" But it helps someone else.
Yeah.
My wife is very tolerant.
Yeah.
It was a scathing expose.
Yeah.
One of the strongest I've seen in media in a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you deal with that? When you're first starting to talk about this, when you're choosing to be open about certain things, and you guys could go out there and talk about a portion of the experience and leave some of it behind, leave some of it private, but obviously, there's a world in which you're not doing that. Why display all of it? Josie, you want to?
I think it's really important to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to not be the cancer patient who puts on a brave face and soldiers on. Mm-hmm. And even if you're doing really well, there are times when you're not doing well. And I think to share that vulnerability, it's meaningful for the audience because they know you're sharing part of yourself. Mm-hmm. And, you have to work out boundaries with your partner, your family members, and, if you cross the line, you get feedback. And you're like, okay, I won't do that anymore. And I was interviewed by our local alternative paper, and they did a big article on me, and it was basically how to do cancer. And I was really honest, and people were so appreciative of that level of honesty. And they needed it, and they've really embraced that. So I think people are ready to hear what happened to you when you were younger, and your hands, and what happened to a third of your vagina, because people don't know. I went into cancer treatment thinking, this will be easy. I have early stage breast cancer. Lump back to me, a little chemo, a little radiation. I had no clue.
It doesn't matter if it's, stage 0 or stage 4.
Yeah.
It's still cancer. And, in 2001, we didn't have cancer in all these TV shows and movies and songs. And, when you hear those words, you are never prepared enough, or you witness someone else hearing those words. You are just never prepared enough. When you talk about vulnerability, I will share, I had an episode right before this, because I talk about my story all the time. But talking about the fertility aspect of it and sharing that I'm still hurt, I'm still angry about it, I cried an hour before I got here. You know, because when I say that rips open something so painful for me, I mean it. And that's what cancer does. You know, it teaches you how to survive, but it also hurts you and makes you a shell of who you once were.
Yeah.
I had a unique situation. Spoiler alert, so no chemo, I'm still here. But also, spoiler alert, I'm still a concert pianist. And it took me 6 years to rehabilitate my left hand on my own. And I meant what I said. I had no 20s. I was impotent, infertile, malnourished, neutropenic, on a liquid diet for 2 years because my esophagus was eroded from all the radiation. I didn't have a 20s. I'm glad I didn't peak in my 20s, by the way. But no one should peak in their 20s. Just point of start. But I was able to play piano again after just assiduously doing nothing but I had a job, and I came home and I played piano. And I released 2 albums back to back, 41 songs that I wrote in my head from my experience on 2 albums in 1998 and 1999. And I didn't do it for glory, I did it for me. Because I wanted to hold something in my hand that I still own this in some way, shape, or form. They're on iTunes, whatever. 8 cents a check shows up my grandma every week. But
What are we going to do with you?
no, but my point is how I chose to express myself in the late 90s because it was all shame back then. Total, unabashed
And for
shame.
cervical cancer,
Right.
there's still shame. Yeah.
You've got shame and you've got a stigma.
Yeah.
So you've got people judging you not only for your cancer, but the kind of cancer you
Yes.
have. And
Right.
that's just so wrong.
Stop it, people. Stop it right now.
But not to compete with Tamika, but my coming out party was a concert on the National Mall for 30,000 people.
He just had to compete with me.
In 2002. Yes.
I don't care just as long as he helps me slide out of this thing when it's time to leave.
Everyone on the stage is an overachiever. That is what we can get away with. Jason, I want to talk to you also. I want you to weigh in here because this became public for you in part because your late wife wrote about it, and then you chose to also write about it and talk about it. But you didn't necessarily think that it would kind of evolve into this public-facing persona. I'm wondering what it was like when you started making the decision to talk about this so publicly and openly.
Well, what was it like for me? It was cathartic, certainly, to do the writing that I first did when I spoke about this issue in public, and then it just became something that, to me, gave me meaning. It gave me meaning in my life where I never really had that in other aspects of my life before that, and that keeps me moving forward and talking about it.
Yeah. So I have more questions, but I do want to go to the audience just in case you have any.
One back here. So this question is for Josie.
Yes.
You talk about how using humor and being a comic has helped you to get through the journey, through the treatments and all that, but I know I'm a physician at Northwestern, and I know that many patients, when you talk about cancer, expect you to be sad and talk about how grave it is. And I wonder if you got pushback, and how did you how you dealt with that?
No, because most people know me, and I live in, Vermont's small, so it's tiny, and I'm known for being a comic, so I actually had the opposite happen in some ways, which is when I had a weak moment and I would express it to someone at the coffee shop whom I knew, they'd be like, wait. They were really surprised because I wasn't dealing with it in a humorous way. So it's an interesting dynamic because people expect you to respond the way they know you. And if they know you as a comic and a performer on stage, and with that show that I did, I was very vulnerable, and it was not a laugh fest by any means. And people, the response was they really liked it, but they were like, "Whoa, that was very different for you," and I got judged for that a little bit. I mean, it was a powerful show, but people were expecting me to be funny about it all the time. So I got opposite pushback. But I do think you have your hand up. Keep going. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I can't quite see, but I think we have one back there.
So, hi, my name is Gauri Ramadas. I'm actually a medical oncologist here in the Chicagoland area. So I first want to say thank you to you, everyone, for sharing their stories. It's raw, it's true, and thank you. Specifically to Mr. Rosenthal, I think as a medical oncologist, I focus on diarrhea. I focus on brachytherapy. I focus on the patient that is going through everything. I really do rely on hospice at the end of life. Johnny Immerman, I use your charity quite often, so thank you as well, and for the caregivers and the support that you
Can we give a shout out to Johnny
Yes,
Immerman?
thank you, yes.
Chicago's own, yes.
But I guess my question specifically is, here after hearing you speak, 20-minute appointments, right? How do I address the family and the spouses sufficiently? Because I look back and my gut is just, I worry about, end of life, and you talk with the patient, you talk with all their side effects, but I now, you talk with the family, you get to know them like I see them every week. I know them very well. And that's just the gift of being a medical oncologist, in my opinion, of getting to know patients and their families very well. But the gut-wrenching part of it is maybe I don't address the family as well as I should.
So
what are your thoughts on that? And what insight do you have to help me?
Specifically on the end of life, is that what you're asking me?
No, through the whole process, I guess. And I guess I'm more specifically end of life. I use hospice more than, I rely on hospice more because that's where we're going. They have a lot of services. But maybe earlier on, what can I do?
I mean, my instinct is to say to be as honest as you possibly can and don't try to sugarcoat the issue. This is a very, like everyone here has discussed, this is a very brutal, agonizing, painful, sad, emotional time. And I think being as honest as you can with patients, whether it's your chances of survival or whatever it is, and also all of the treatments you're going to go through and how brutal that's going to be, those things need to be discussed.
I'd like to add just one thing to that. I would say make your appointments a little bit longer. 20 minutes isn't enough time because what happens for cancer patients is the first 10 minutes we're not even listening yet. So we don't start cluing in until like minute 12, and then we're like, oh God, we're done.
And once we start having treatment, forget it, because then we can't remember anything.
Right. Yeah. So, and I know you have insurance issues, but I can't imagine with a family how you get the time that you need for your kids, especially for children, to figure out, to find time for them. How are they dealing with it?
I will say one thing though, and our oncologist was unbelievable, and I never really got the sense of being rushed. Oh, and also my daughter, who is now 22 years old, at the time was 19, and she asked to meet with our oncologist.
Oh, that's so great.
To really understand from a no bullshit perspective what is going on, what's happening to my mother, physically. I want to understand what's happening. And he sat with my daughter and my two sons for as long as they needed to be heard. It was beautiful.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think we have one right there.
Hi, my name is Lisa Berry Edwards. I'm with the Prevent Cancer Foundation. We've been fortunate enough to work with several of you. And I was wondering, when the cancer story is being told by someone else, when it's not in your personal voice, what is important to you in how that's being told?
Who's telling the story?
If it's a nonprofit or another advocate who maybe hasn't had the personal perspective but wants to still get the message out for how people can take care of themselves.
I can't speak to that because that hasn't happened for me. I think the only thing I would say is just make sure you're being true to that patient.
That's what I was going to say, be accurate. We want, especially once we become patient advocates, we want our stories to be heard. We want them to be shared. And I think just making sure that it's shared with the same authenticity that we share it.
And don't sensationalize it for the sake of sensationalizing it. And don't try to fit it in the box you're trying to address. Realize it's its own entity and it needs to stand on its own.
I've media trained hundreds of cancer patients, and it's difficult because sometimes it's too new and it's too raw, and they're not ready to separate themselves from the emotions with what needs to be said. And it's all about when they're ready to agree that it's time to tell their story. Are they willing to understand that it isn't about them? It's about the message they want to share.
I think we're going to leave it there. I cannot thank you all enough for being here. Audience, please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.